folks out there, are you actually looking to get an infusion of funds into your business? Well, my talk today will be on writing a great pitch proposal to the National Science Foundation, which can be a source of cash and valuable feedback. I'll provide a few tips and go through the process, but I really wanted to start with the why. Can we have the next slide, please? The Valley of Death. Actually, grants are one of the best ways to bridge the Valley of Death. Scientists that are translating an innovation from the lab to the marketplace often find themselves caught in limbo once their research funding has dried up, but they are not yet making money from the commercial sale of their product. And this uneasy time is known as the Valley of Death. And it's this because it's the stage where most startups often die unless an investment can be found to bridge that gap between the gap in resources. And in today's presentation, we will talk about one aspect of bridging that valley, and that is the America's Seed Fund. And we can move to the next slide. America's Seed Fund is just the rebranding of the National Science Foundation. The NSF provides capital via the Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR, and the Small Business Technology Transfer, STTR programs. As most of you know, the major difference between an SBIR and an STTR is that the STTR requires the small business to partner or collaborate with a U.S. nonprofit research institution. In contrast, the SBIR allows you to submit application as a small business alone, or as with a partner, or with other entities that you collaborate with. In both cases, these grants can provide much needed non-dilutive capital. Non-dilutive capital funding refers to funding that does not involve equity, debt, or other elements of the business ownership structure. And as you will learn as you build your business, this is an important consideration. It helps you hold on to more of your company. I have the next slide. So just some key points about the NSF are shown in this slide. First of all, NSF is a granting agency, and although they have topics and areas of interest, they welcome investigator-initiated projects. Secondly, both SBIR and STR proposals, but not the project pitch, are peer-reviewed, and this is an important point. Lastly, the NSF places a strong emphasis on companies' commercial potential. They also value and support cutting-edge, high-risk research. Both of these preferences, you'll find, are reflected in the pitch proposal questions, which examine the fit of your proposal to the NSF standards. This is going to be tough if I can't get out NSF all the time, but let's move to the next slide while I try to remember how to say NSF. This slide focuses on the SBIR, STTR programs from the National Institute of Health and the NSF. Other agencies have similar programs for small businesses, such as the Department of Defense and the Department of Agriculture, but I imagine most of you will be probably seeking funding from either of these two federal sources, the NIH or the NSF. The biggest difference between the NSF and NIH programs for small business lies in the mission. The application of, the NSF, the NIH is interested in the application of knowledge actually to enhance health and wellness. And the NSF is more focused upon the development of technologies while looking for profound, and I emphasize the profound, societal impact. So one thing to note is that while the NIH has specific due dates or deadlines for proposal submission, the NSF has submission windows. However, at the end of a submission window, it actually converts to a deadline, in that no other proposal will be considered for review within that time period. There are actually a couple of other points to be made. And the first is that unlike the NIH, the NSF does not provide information to the public on when review or ad hoc panels or councils meet. And if you ask the question of whether there is a better time, whether it's better to submit at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the year, program offices from NSF will insist that funding is allocated based upon proposal quality, regardless of when it's received. The other major point is that to submit a phase 1 to the NFF and SF, you need to be invited, and that's the whole point of doing the project pitch. Lastly, if you look at the funding and the budgets, clearly the NIH has an approximately 6-fold higher budget for SBIR, STTR programs, and actually makes more awards. One caveat is that most NSF phase 1 awards are made to companies that are newly formed and are very small. The NSF is also a very good place for submission of platform technologies and high-risk, high-reward projects. You'll also note that well, this chart might look familiar to the folks at University Lab Partners. I just modified it slowly from their article on tips for competitive SBIR, STTR proposals. Can we have the next slide? This slide just indicates that the NSF funds companies across nearly all technology and market sectors. And while the life sciences represent approximately a quarter of the market sectors, platform technologies can cross over to other sectors for NSF funding. These areas include sectors like photonics or information technologies, chemistry, and the environment. I'm not going to say too much more about it. This was fiscal year 2018 funding. And sometimes the number of projects shifts. in 2020, the life science side went a little bit further because of COVID. There were a large number of COVID grants that also were submitted to the NSF for funding. We have the next slide. Well, this slide, and I guess most of the ones that are following are really quite wordy. And the intent is that the slides themselves will have enough details so that they can be useful for your future review, either as a video, which a number of you will have access to, or just as a slide deck itself. So the first point that you need to consider when you're going to attempt to submit an NSF grant is whether your company is eligible. And your company must be a small business with fewer than 500 employees and located in the US. That 500 employees also includes affiliates. At least 50% of your company's equity must be owned by US citizens or permanent residents. And all funded work needs to take place in the United States, including work done by consultants and contractors. Then there are some restrictions on the project's principal investigator. The PI must be legally employed at least 20 hours a week by the company seeking funding throughout the duration of the project. The principal investigator also needs to commit at least 1 month or 173 hours of effort to the funded project per 6 months of project duration. And as I mentioned before, the phase 1 project can be within the range of 6 to 12 months. And the funding remains the same whether you complete it in 6 months or in the full year. We have the next slide. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. This is just a slide of the funding phases. You can see that you can get something like $1.75 million in total, with $256,000 as the maximum for the 6 to 12 month phase 1. Phase 2 is $1 million for 24 months. And phase 2B funding involves third-party contribution, and NSF will match up to $250,000 or so. The phase 2B funding from the NSF, however, is only to be used for research and development, while third-party funding can be used for commercialization purposes. We have the next slide. Unlike NIH programs, only NSF SBIR phase 1 awardees may apply for phase 2 funding. There's no fast track or direct to phase 2 like the NIH. Move to the next slide. We're finally getting enough of the basics of NSF programs so that we can really move to the project pitch itself. And the first thing, of course, a project pitch is a requirement before you're invited to submit a phase 1 proposal. So unlike an NIH proposal, where you directly prepare a full proposal, submit it, wait about 4 months to know whether your proposal will be funded. Startups who submit the 3 pages project pitch will know within 3 weeks if they meet the program's minimum requirement. If your project is a good fit for the program, you will receive an official invitation from the NSF to submit a full proposal. If you are not invited to submit, you'll be told why your project is not appropriate for the program. Applicants that submit a project pitch can also get additional guidance and feedback from program directors. This is an important piece of it. It can save you lots of time and anguish by pursuing the project pitch. Can I have the next slide? Okay, well, the thing is that a project pitch can be submitted at any time. However, each small business can only submit 1 project pitch at a time and up to 2 unique project pitches per submission window. Any small business with a pending project pitch, however, must wait for a response on that before submitting another project pitch. Quite simply, you can't submit 1 project pitch and immediately thereafter, submit another one, and it would have to be unique. You have to wait until you get a response from the NSF on the first project pitch that's pending. And lastly, any small business that has received an invitation to submit a full proposal must wait for a resolution of the full proposal before submitting a new or revised project pitch. By that, it means that while you have a grant that's pending, you are unable to submit a new or even a revised project pitch that's unique from the proposal that's being under consideration. We have the next slide. Well, this slide shows that along with your company information, you will have 4 key elements of your project pitch. And these elements are the technology innovation, the technological objectives and challenges, the market opportunity, and lastly, the company and the team. Okay, we're going to now go through each of those sections one by one. Can we move to the next slide? The first major section is a description of the technology itself. And in describing the technological innovation, you have to emphasize what is new, innovative, and unproven about your potential product or service. You also need to briefly discuss the societal and commercial significance of the problem, who it impacts, and why current solutions are inadequate. Lastly, you must highlight your solution and where your solution has differential advantages over what's currently available. This section is limited to a maximum of 500 words, and that is a challenge. Essentially, you must be clear and concise about the technology and tout its advantages and significance in society within that time limit. And now we come in the next slide to my first tip. My first tip is to use all of the landscape. Limit the use of bullet points. Shoot for about 499 words. Don't go over the limit. Never provide answers in just a couple of sentences. Seriously, do not try to fill the form in online. The submission is basically online. Don't try to fill it in online. Before you submit anything, write it out in a word processor and edit it to a precise word count. Make sure that you check the spelling and the grammar. There's nothing worse than you put something together and realize that you left out a whole sentence or did not check the spelling and the grammar. You really can't go back to correct it once it's online. So make sure that you do the work beforehand and then load your response to the questions online. Have the next slide, please. Okay, this slide talks about the technical objectives and challenges, and you can think of this similar to the specific aims page of a traditional proposal. Like a specific aims page, it is very, if not singularly important. And what you need to do for this section is to describe the research and development or technical work to be done in the phase 1 project, including a discussion of how and why the proposed work will prove or define the fact that the project is technically feasible, and that you can significantly reduce the technical risk related to production of your product or service. And that reduction of technical risk is important when you're looking for funding. One of the things that VCs and other investors like to avoid is risk. Essentially think this as sort of like the advanced level of a proof of concept where you're actually reducing the risk to the point that your product can be commercially viable. You need to discuss how this work could contribute to making the product indeed commercially viable and impactful. And most importantly, this section should also convey the fact that the proposed work meets the definition of research and development as opposed to either straightforward engineering or an incremental product development task. Like the section above, like you need to limit your response to this section to 500 words. So the same advice that I gave you before applies. Make sure that you develop this offline and then upload it to the NSF Project Pitch site. I have the next slide, and that's our second tip. And that is there are certain words that are better to use and both of these first two sections. And the words on the good lists are more quantifiable and are in the language of research and development. The second set of words, the ones that are less good, are words that are more suggestive of a fishing expedition and should be avoided. The word investigate is sort of okay. It's sort of intermediate between the two, but do your best to use words and verbs that are more quantitative in nature. Have the next slide. Well, this is actually one of my favorite quotes from Peter Drucker. If you don't know who Peter Drucker is, he's sort of a world famous management consultant. And he points out that any business has two and only two basic functions: marketing and innovation. And what you'll see is that an NSF pitch proposal covers both of those aspects and forces you to think and evaluate your company in light of those two basic functions. We have the next slide, please. This slide defines some of the terms that you will need to address in the market opportunities section. Right now, I'm going to pause and say if there are any MBAs in the audience, please forgive me for the next few minutes, okay? It's kind of basic stuff, but the first thing you need to address in this market opportunity section of the pitch proposal is the question of what is the customer profile. The customer profile is actually two things. First, who are the customers? What's the target population or organization, the demographics that you need to appeal to? The second question within the customer profile is, how do your customers buy? Do they use direct channels? Direct channels allow the customer to buy goods directly from the manufacturer, you potentially. And that's different from an indirect channel, which moves your product or service through other distribution networks to get to the consumer. Lastly, we come to pain points. Pain points. Your ideal customer is one that's experienced a pain you can solve. Obviously, that's not back pain, but a difficulty within the business. If you can eliminate that pain, then your customer is ready, willing, and able to buy your product or service. So moving on to the next slide, we get into what kinds of data are important for you to provide. And it is important for you to provide data that supports the fact that there is a market for your product or service. The NSF Seed Fund intends to support companies which are viable with a potential for growth. And this slide points out some of the data that you should gather. Firstly is market size. And market size refers to the total amount of sales or customers in a given industry over a period of time. It's often a single year or can be multiple years, usually 4 or 5 years. The second place where you need to provide some data, is the projected growth, and that's what the expected growth rate based upon information that's already known. And lastly, you'll see the term within the project pitch questions about market segmentation, and segmentation is actually a process of dividing the market into smaller, more defined categories. So particularly if there's a big market for your project, for your product or service, you might want to define that small target of, or segment of the market that you're going to look to sell your product to. The good news is that this data is available for almost all product and service areas. And an example of a simple internet search for the disposable face mask market is shown in the next slide. One thing I'm noticing is that the text size, the size of the texts have really changed I guess, in this presentation. I apologize that some of this looks like the fonts were all mixed up, but well, we'll go through it anyway. Anyway, this search, just setting up this search, Google provided over 150 million entities in less than a second. One of the advantages you have as compared to people when I first started out in business is that you don't have to go to a library and dig this all out, or go to a whole ton of different sources, but you can gather information fairly rapidly. The first website on this list provided the information that the global face mail market size exceeded a value of approximately 75 billion in the first quarter of 2020. And this market is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate, that's KGR, you'll see that as you go along, of 53% from 2020 to 2027. That's unbelievable. That's most annual growth rates, particularly in biotech, usually are in the single digits. So if you were making face masks or had a new face mask design, you probably did really well in 2020 and will do well beyond that. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so now we really get to addressing the market opportunity question on the NSF pitch. And of course, the first thing that you need to do is describe the customer profile and pain points. And they also want you to project the direct and indirect customers and indicate the current market size and its projected growth. And as I said earlier, if the market is very large, they want you to identify the subsection that you will target for your initial customer base. And for many of you, this is going to require some research. And luckily, there's a lot of market information out there. As I showed you above, some of it is available on Google and some may require a little bit more digging. You can look to your local small business association to assist you, as well as ULP and ScienceDocs can also assist you with getting your hands on market information. But most importantly, you need to explain your your product's advantages over competitive technologies. You need to identify those pain points and how your product will solve those problems. Again, you have to fit your response to a maximum of 250 words. These limits, just to go back a little bit, these limits are actually quite useful. They actually force you to think concisely and put essentially your thoughts into a easily understood and carefully worded paragraph. This becomes useful when you think of other kinds of pitches like elevator pitches and portions of your business plan. Okay, let's move to the next one. And this is a section on company and team. The first 2 points on this slide are okay and can be easily dispatched, but the people in your company will ultimately determine the success or failure of your organization, of your business. So focus on the qualifications and relevance of key team members. Again, provide a justification why the team members are qualified to develop and commercialize your proposed product. And once more, it's limited to 250 words. Okay, moving quickly to the next slide. Next slide, please. We have the next slide. Yeah, okay. Thank you. This is just how to submit. Go back one to that. I went past the submission one quick. It just sums up the submission thing, which is done online. After submission, you'll get an email confirmation with a pitch submission number, and that number is useful if you need to ask people at NSF questions about your response. Okay, so what happens next? Next slide. Well, after you submit your pitch, you'll hear back in 3 weeks or so. And there are 3 possible outcomes: yes, no, or maybe. Let's move to the next slide. So yes, your pitch is accepted. Okay, you're formally invited to submit a full application. After your acceptance, you have up to 1 year to submit your full proposal. Along with that proposal, you need to include a copy of your acceptance email. So make a copy of it right away so that when you need to do your submission, you have that email. The second thing you should do is begin work on the phase 1 proposal. The next slide shows what happens if you get a no. Well, the first thing is that you have rapid feedback that the project pitch is not a good fit for the NSF, and then you can go back to the drawing board. You can resubmit a revised version of your pitch using the feedback that was provided to you by the program director. And alternatively, and probably the best move, is that you really should evaluate whether another agency would be better suited to your project. Okay, so moving on to the third option, which is maybe. Well, your pitch is not initially accepted, and you're asked to provide additional information to the program director for clarification before a final decision is made. And you need to carefully address the program director's questions to increase your chance of having your pitch accepted. Submit your response, cross your fingers. But if I could add one more point, it would be to run your pitch by others who have had experience with doing an NSF pitch proposal. And that could be people at ULP or with those of us at ScienceDocs. And one last thought about a pitch. Having a really good pitch is important to your business. It's essentially a business plan that you can present verbally to potential investors in a business. Startup owners must be able to clearly explain their business opportunity to potential investors. And members of the team also need to be able to give a very similar kind of explanation. One thing that's really important is that every member of your team should have access to a simple elevator pitch, a very short version of the business opportunity, and everyone should have that as part of their memory, so that when they meet a potential investor, everybody has the same message. At that, I'm going to end and take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, John. If anybody has any questions and would like to come on the mic, we're happy to field those questions. Just go ahead and pop on the mic. Quiet out there.
Okay. I guess I was pretty clear, and one thing is, like I said, those slides were set up so that they could be used as a freestanding slide deck. Where possible, I've indicated where the links are that you can find information. The NSF website is very helpful. One question I get a lot is, well, how do I know whether my proposal is innovative enough? And I think the best thing is if nobody else is doing what you're doing, obviously. If nobody else has done this before, then your chances are that you're really innovative. To me, that's always been a rarity. But one of the things that you can do is you can call the NSF directors and actually have a conversation. Say even before you submit the proposal, just have a conversation.
Great. Now, we get asked this a lot. Where can you find examples of recently funded, phase one proposals?
Well, if you're uh, looking at submitting an NIH proposal, you can find examples of them. Uh, Unfortunately, you can't do that. The NSF doesn't make those available. So if you go to the NSF website, you won't find any examples. Whereas if you go to the NIH SBIR STTR website, you'll find not only just examples of full proposals, but you'll also see differences with fast track and phase one and phase two proposals. But the NSF doesn't do that. The best way to get at that is to talk to people that have submitted them before. Talk to people at ULP, talk to me and my fellow ScienceDocs. We've seen more than a few proposals. Um, Actually, at ScienceDocs, we also, provide sort of high-level review of proposals. So if someone um, has a proposal that they're thinking of submitting, we could do a very high level, not particularly labor intensive in terms of cost review of the proposal. We also have a pretty good idea of what's innovative and what's not. I think Karen is smiling. We've all seen people that think they've invented sliced bread, and it turns out that it's somebody not only invented sliced bread, but they also designed the slicer. So it there there are a lot of people out there that you should ask, and I think the biggest thing, biggest piece of advice I can give anybody is to talk to experts. Um, there are a lot of resources for entrepreneurs, lots of them, and you can certainly benefit from other people's mistakes, the ones that they made, and you don't have to make. Are those are the really valuable lessons in front of you.